Well, hey guys, welcome to the studio, Gangland Wire. Glad to be back in here. I am a retired Kansas City Police Intelligence Unit detective. Worked the mob for about 15 years in Kansas City. Well, guys, I've been talking about a lot of different mobs and a lot of different guys in the mob over the years, and here's a new one that I had not heard of before. It was kind of important in his own way. The guy's his real name is Librio Milito. I think it's Milito. Anyhow, he was affectionately known as Louis Milito, and he made his entrance into the world on April 26, 1942. He was born in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. Big Sicilian population there, a real vibrant neighborhood, a lot of corner stores and social clubs. That's where Gotti and a lot of these other guys were growing up and hanging out around there. And he was born to Sicilian immigrants. And his upbringing was shaped by that rich cultural tapestry. Remy, his upbringing was shaped by the rich cultural tapestry of this neighborhood. Louis Milito was a spirited youth, as they say. He found himself drawn into the world of petty crimes, as most of these guys were. And he eventually became a member of the Rampers. Now, the Rampers was a local street gang known for its exploits throughout Brooklyn. And guess who else was a significant member of the Rampers? Our good friend, Sammy the Bull Gravano. Now, despite his diminutive stature, he was kind of a small guy. He's 5'7". He was strong. He was stronger than hell. Louis Milito, his physical prowess was exceptional. Exceptional, they said. In his 20s, he pursued a career that you wouldn't think a guy like this would pursue. He became a hairdresser. He was a hairdresser and he got interested in this art and he really liked it. And his wife, Linda, later on will write a book and she attests to his exceptional skill as a hairdresser. Now, go figure that one. We're going to tell you about him. He's a stone killer with Sammy the Bull Gravano, but he also was a hairdresser. Now, some of his early criminal exploits were kind of the same as a lot of these guys. We had a crew in Kansas City that came up like this, and what they called it was trunking. They were breaking into car trunks and stealing stuff. And lots of times these guys also, they graduate into breaking into the car trunks of jewelry salesmen and other kind of salesmen that have some expensive watches and things like that in their trunk. And I know one guy used to hit golf courses. Guys would go to the golf course, they'd stay after and play cards, lock their clubs up in their trunk, and this guy would go hit all the cars looking for a golf course, expensive golf clubs. He also ran a pretty lucrative stolen car ring, and he had an uncanny talent for lock picking. Now, everybody can't pick a lock. Have you ever tried to pick a lock? It's hard. It's damn hard. I tell you what, I was at a demonstration of that, and they had some real simple locks that I could pick, but boy, when they got even a little bit more complicated, just like your normal lock, deadbolt lock in your house, I couldn't do it. It takes a certain touch. Everybody can't do it. Now, since he came from the Rampers, he's got all the required street cred to join Sammy the Bull Gravano and get into the Gambino family because that's where Gravano went. In the mid-60s, there's a significant turn in Louis Milito's life when he began working for the Gambino crime family. They both came up, like Sammy the Bull and Louis Milito came up with under Gambino capo Tato Arello. Now, I'm not sure about the pronunciation of that, but Tato Arello. Like Sammy the Bull, Louis Milito came up under a Gambino capo named Toto Arello. So, and so they both kind of had the first mentor. This will tie these two guys together for really the rest of their lives. It was kind of a complex life, a dance, if you will, that Louis had between his personal life and his criminal life. Because most of these guys are like that. They like their family. They do things with their family. So despite his criminal life, he displayed a lot of affection and humor towards his family. And his wife, again, wrote a book. Linda was her name. You might look that up, Linda Milito. And it really showed it. I think the lawyer word, the $25 lawyer word is dichotomy, which means he's like kind of two different people here. he was stealing, he was steal anything. He stole change from phone booths. He would be part of high-end burglaries and different kinds of jewelry thefts. And he ends up becoming involved in high-profile murders also. I mean, this guy was multifaceted, wouldn't you say? He was a piece of work. He got inducted into the Gambino family under his capo, Toto Arello. Sammy Gravano had already become a made man. And then, so in that Arello crew. And so, they like, Sammy the Bull's kind of his mentor and will bring him along. For some reason, during the 60s, Arello resigned as capo. And I couldn't get the full story on that. And Paul Castellano promotes Sammy the Bull Gravano to be Miloto's new boss, that Arello crew boss. They say that Louis' loyalty was a cornerstone of his character. He was fiercely devoted to Sammy the Bull. I mean, fiercely devoted to him. He had to have been to do some of the things he did with him. Like he took part in the murder of the Philadelphia mobster Johnny Keys Simone. Now, this Johnny Keys Simone, he was from Philly, but this was done on the order of Paul Castellano, but it was also approved by the commission. They approved it by the commission approved this because they'd also approved the new Philly capo, Nicky Scarfo, to take over as boss of the Philly family after the murder of the General Don Angelo Bruno. Nicky Scarfo asked the commission to eliminate a potential threat from Simone. He felt that Simone would be more loyal to Bruno and less loyal to him, and maybe even feel like he had been pushed aside. So Sammy the Bull and our friend Louis the hairdresser, they kidnapped Simone, Johnny Keys, from a New Jersey country club called the Skyview Country Club. And they threw him bound and gagged in the back of a van, and they took a trip out to Staten Island to a kind of out-of-the-way place where they could bury him right away. Probably already had the hole dug, don't you imagine? Sammy Gravano had planned this murder out before and then brought Louis along. During this trip, Johnny Keys, Simone, asked Gravano and Milito to let him die like a man. And here's an interesting thing, and we know this because Gravano had to admit this is one of the murders he had to admit to. During this trip, it was about 75 miles, Johnny Keys had a heart attack. Go figure, he had a heart attack. He asked if he could take a nitro tablet so he'd stay alive long enough to be shot. And he said, I want to die like a man. So that's another thing, Johnny, that's another thing that Sammy the Bull will say, that he always respected Johnny Keys Simone because he died like Cosa Nostra. Now, on August 16th, 1970, Sammy the Bull Gravano and Louis Milito were driving on Kings Highway near West 8th Street in Gravesend, Brooklyn. Got a whole story on Gravesend and on, Netflix or one of them. Sammy the Bull had a cast on his right ankle do that over again. Now, Sammy the Bull had a cast on his right ankle and was limping around. And he got this in a scuffle kind of a thing that happened when his nightclub was robbed by a guy named Aldo Candido. Well, he thought he knew Aldo Candido. And Gravano and Milito were, as usual, packing. They had their pieces on them that night. And as they're driving down this Kings Highway around 8th Street, if you know where that is in Brooklyn, Gravano all of a sudden yells out to Louis, he said, pull over, that's the guy that robbed my place. Both the guys jumped out and ran up the guy and blasted him several times in the head and the chest. Dropped like a sack of potatoes, and they jumped back in the car and got out of there. They cowboyed that one. That's not something that a mob guy normally does, is cowboy a hit quite like that. And when you do something like that you don't normally do, there can be a problem. And there was a problem. This was not Aldo Candido, the guy that robbed Sammy the Bull. This was 16-year-old Alan Kaiser, who just happened to be walking down the street minding his own business. Now, some people say Alan looked like him. Yeah, I've seen the pictures. He looked older. He had like a mustache, and he did look a little older than 16, but irregardless, he was a 16-year-old kid. And Sammy acted rashly, really rashly. That's not, normally he was a considerate considered business kind of a guy. Considered probably is not the right word. He was a cool character, shall we say, and he planned things out. And he didn't take risk. That was a huge risk. I mean, what if a police car driven around the corner about the time they jumped out and ran up to this? 1978, Louis Milito will murder again. This time he did it for the Gambino underboss, Frank DiCicco. The victim was a mob associate named Nicholas Chib, and this just happened to be the brother of Gravano's wife. Now we know why Sammy the Bull didn't take a direct part in this hit. DiCicco had to bypass Gravano and give the order directly to Louis and to a guy named Joe Stymie D'Angelo. And Milito, God, he said, I don't know if we should do this. And DiCicco finally decided, and after he consulted with Paul Castellano, that they should tell Sammy the Bull what they were up to. And Milito was not comfortable until Sammy the Bull knew what they were doing. And they say Castellano made this concession with one stipulation. There's always a hook, huh? If Gravano vehemently opposes Sciabetta's killing, his brother-in-law's killing, they're going to kill Gravano. Gravano, I mean, this guy, he's got that native intelligence that he can read a room. This dude knows what time it is. He did not dispute the murder of his brother-in-law. As the 1980s unfold and narcotics, cocaine takes over, and there's just a ton of money being made there. Loyalties are changing in the Gambino family, a lot of tension in there, partly because of this Castellano's disapproval of Sammy the Bull and Louis grievances with him over some business deals that went awry. And I know Castellano also was bitching about Gravano because he was making so much money. And he thought he was keeping everything for himself. And I think John Gotti kind of thought that too. Sammy the Bull can make a lot of money, and Louis Milito was a lot right there with him, and they didn't think he was sharing enough. So 1984, Louis Milito, Louis the hairdresser, his criminal journey, his journey in this life took a darker turn, as if it didn't have enough dark turns already. Took a darker turn, and he pled guilty to tax evasion, and he got a 2-year prison sentence. Like a guy told me once, hey man, I can do a tray standing on my head. He probably told them to ask him to talk. I can see it now. Ask him to talk. And he said, hey, man, I can do a deuce standing on my head, which is true. But during his incarceration, the landscape of the Gambino crime family went through a seismic shift in 1984. If you remember, John Gotti, backed up by Sammy the Bull and others, killed Paul Castellano so Gotti could take over the Gambino family. So upon his release, Louis found himself in a Gambino family that had done, all kinds of changes and overhaul, and Sammy moves on up. He's an underboss. And Milito, he openly expressed dissent about this. And it's like, hey, what's going on? You killed the boss. And there was a lot of people in the New York mob that didn't agree with Gotti's murder of Castellano. Boy, once you express your dissent like that within the family, you pretty much are going to seal your fate, especially with this bunch of guys. 1979-80, Louis's wife, Linda, had begun selling real estate. And in her book later on, she'll say that I never liked or trusted Sammy the Bull. She just had this instinct about it. And even though Louis and Sammy were thick as thieves, they were fall partners, buddies, they did crimes together. And she actually, at Louis's request, helped Sammy upgrade his living circumstances and found him a nice home for a decent price in an exclusive areas. Everybody wants to moving on up to the east side, they move on out to the suburbs or whatever, move to a more expensive neighborhood, want to be more like Paul Castellano. Linda, Louis's wife, didn't really want to deal with Sammy the Bull, but Louis kept working on her, and she finally relented. And she says, I'm going to do it, but I'm not doing Sammy any favors. I want my full commission. Louis said, go ahead, do what you got to do. People got to pay for your services. Nobody expects you to do this for nothing. Linda found Sammy the Bull a house for $375,000, paid cash for it, but he actually had the cash for it, but he didn't want to put it all out, so he did a half mortgage. Sammy the Bull bought that house, but they tore it down and then built a mansion, even almost as big as Castellano's. People called it Sammy's Shrine to Sammy. These final weeks, by 1988, Louis Milito he was kind of burdened by regret over his life, and he had some poignant discussions with his wife Linda, and she writes about this in her book. Had a heartfelt conversation. They decided they needed to go ahead and get a divorce, and he acknowledged that his actions over his life had taken a toll on both her and their son. They had one son, Louis. Valentine's Day 1988, Louis made a final visit to his wife Linda, left her a heart-shaped balloon and a written acknowledgement of the cold realities of the world. Now, I think maybe he knew he was in trouble or something, because, I mean, that's like kind of like leaving your jewelry, your billfold with your wife when you go to a meeting. But shortly thereafter that day, he met with Sammy the Bull Gravano, and nobody seems to know exactly what happened, and his body was never recovered. Now, I don't think Sammy admitted to this one that he did this. I think he felt like he didn't have to. He must have really felt he was cool on this. So, that's the end of Louis, the hairdresser, Milito. And in the end, it was he left behind a really complicated, string of relatives and friends, and he went out with a lot of pain and regret. I think that's maybe probably expressed that to Sammy the Bull, that he was not happy the way things had turned out with killing Paul Castellano, and Sammy's moved on up, and more than likely, this is, he had always lived his life on this edge, and loyalty and betrayal coexist with each other in that life. There's no doubt about it. There's loyalty on one hand, but there's a lot of betrayal on the other hand. So if you want to live in the shadows, an organized crime life, why, you got to be you got to be up for that kind of stuff. Not everybody's up for it. So thanks a lot, guys. I think Louis Milito had a really interesting story, and I wanted to bring that to you as kind of a minor guy that I'd never heard of before. If you're really into it, you probably have, but I had not heard of him, and I just thought he was interesting, especially his relationship with his wife, because I like that kind of that dichotomy of these mobsters. They've got this wife and family that they care about and spend a lot of time with, but then on the other hand, they go over in the city or back out in the neighborhood and the social club or whatever, and kill people. They cheat people, they rob people, and end up spending years and years in penitentiary away from their loved ones. So go figure. Don't forget, I like to ride motorcycles, so watch out for motorcycles when you're out there on the streets. And if you have a problem with PTSD and you've been in the service, be sure and go to the VA website. And if you have a problem with drugs and alcohol, whether you're in the service or not, you can go see former Gambino soldier. There's another Gambino guy. Anthony Ruggiano is a drug and alcohol counselor down in Florida, and he's got a hotline on his website. So thanks a lot, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe. As a friend of mine says, like and subscribe down below, or give me a review. I got some movies out there you can rent for only, I think, $1.99 or something. Tell you about a lot more about the Kansas City crime family. I'm always doing stories a couple of times a week sometimes, and just let me know. Make comments on on the Facebook page. You got a huge, big Facebook group, 60,000 people now. It's crazy. Probably more by the time you get to it. A lot of good discussions, a lot of good photos on there and pictures, and from mob families all over the United States. So it's actually very little Kansas City stuff. I put some stuff up there once in a while, and another guy I know does, but it's from, I had a guy join recently as a real expert on the Springfield, Massachusetts crime family, and they connect back to the Genovese family. And got a couple of podcasts out there that are going to tell that story. And of course, a lot of guys from New York and New Jersey and Las Vegas and Milwaukee, you name it, New Orleans, from all over the United States. So thanks a lot, guys.